Uranium grabbed my attention this semester. A lot of that came from our guest speakers in my energy sovereignty class. They talked about climate urgency, mining history, and the politics around it, especially public health risks and indigenous sovereignty. What stood out to me is how all these themes come together when we talk about the future of energy. Because nuclear power is presented as clean, reliable alternative to fossil fuel. And that claim is partly true. According to the International Energy Agency, nuclear power produces very low life cycle greenhouse gas emissions compared to coal and natural gas. And it can provide steady electricity when wind or solar output varies. But nuclear energy depends on a fuel chain that begins with uranium extractions. And those extractions have often imposed serious environmental and social costs on communities living near mines, mills, and waste sites, especially indigenous communities. Because of that contradiction, uranium is not just a fuel. It is a political and ethical test of whether this energy transition actually benefits people and the land. The IEA argues that nuclear energy contributes to climate mitigation and energy security, reducing emissions and dependence on fossil fuel. The Nuclear Energy Agency also describes uranium as essential to low carbon energy system and future energy security. But that's not the whole story. This energy transition is complicated, and historically, it has overlooked the social and environmental impacts of uranium mining. Uranium extractions have contaminated soil and groundwater, exposed workers to radioactive materials, and created long-term environmental damages. These impacts don't go away after mining ends. They last for decades. In many cases, these areas become what are called sacrifice zones, places that absorb long-term harms for the greater good of a reliable energy. A clear example of this is the Navajo Nation. According to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, nearly 30 million tons of uranium ore were extracted from the Navajo lands between 1940 and 1986. This left more than 500 abandoned uranium mines that widespread contamination risk. Cleanup is still happening today, with over $1.7 billion spent on this cleanup. This shows both the scale of damage and the long delay between extraction and cleanup. So, uranium forces us to ask a difficult question. Whose land and communities are being impacted for this energy transition? And can nuclear energy contribute to low carbon future without repeating colonial and extractive harm? Research helps to make these impacts more visible. Hoover, 2017, found that water sources on the Navajo Nation exceeded national standards of arsenic and uranium, especially near abandoned mines. This contamination affects springs and wells that people rely on daily. For many families, this means traveling long distances to collect safe water. So, what looks like a fuel supply from a national perspective can look like daily contamination from local perspectives. Uranium also raises questions of sovereignty. Many uranium deposits are located on or near indigenous lands. Gurez, 2015, points out that uranium extractions is deeply connected to issues of rights, consent, and cultural survival. So the issue is not whether a company has permission to operate. The question is, do communities have real decision-making power? And is their rights to say respected? To say no? This is why uranium connects so strongly to energy sovereignty. In indigenous contexts, sovereignty is not just about controlling resources. It's about the responsibility to the land, water, community health, and future generations. Laws on the Navajo Nation reflect this, showing that uranium is not just an economic issue, but a governance issue shaped by self-determination. And as scholars argue, nuclear energy is deeply tied to colonial history and ongoing struggles of consent. Once sovereignty becomes part of the conversation, the framing changes. The question is no longer, how do we secure more uranium? It becomes, who gets to decide whether uranium extractions happen at all? This is why the idea of clean energy transition can be misleading. Nuclear energy may be clean at a point, but uranium history shows that those benefits are unevenly dispersed. One place gets low carbon electricity, another place absorbs contamination and long-term risk. At the same time, it is important to recognize complexity. Some communities do support uranium or nuclear development under certain conditions. There can be benefits, jobs, infrastructure, and energy independence. And from a national perspective, uranium can be seen as a strategic resource. But state energy and community energy sovereignty are not the same thing. A government may see uranium as security advantage, while other local communities experience environmental and health impacts. This is where the idea of transition becomes important. We can evaluate energy systems based on emissions. We also have to ask who benefits, who consulted, who takes on the risk, and who is dealing with the impacts later. So what are the solutions? First, we need strong, free, prior, and informed consent. Communities have real power to make decisions, including the ability to say no. Second, we need to prioritize cleanup before expansion. It's hard to justify new uranium development when existing communities are still dealing with contamination. Third, energy planning should consider the full fuel chain from mining to waste, not just emissions at the power plant. Fourth, if uranium extraction continues, it must include strong protections, worker safety, groundwater monitoring, transparent waste management, and funding for cleanup. And finally, communities must have the option to pursue alternatives. So the answer isn't to completely reject nuclear energy. It's to rethink how it fits to the future. We have the ability to learn from the past, to center communities' voice, repair harm, and raise the bar for what responsible energy looks like. Uranium can only belong in the future if sovereignty is respected, if cleanup is prioritized, and if communities have real choices. Because a transition is not only about low carbon, it's about creating a system that people can actually live with, and that's still something we can build. Thank you so much.